Ephesians 6, 5 to 8. Slaves, obey your earthly masters with deep respect and fear. Serve them sincerely as you would serve Christ. Try to please them all the time, not just when they're watching you. As slaves of Christ, do the will of God with all your heart. Work with enthusiasm, as though you were working for the Lord rather than for people. Remember that the Lord will reward each one of us for the good we do, whether we're slaves or free. The gospel lesson from Matthew 20, 20 to 21 and 24 to 28. Then the mother of James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to Jesus with her sons. She knelt respectfully to ask a favor. "What's your request?" he asked. She replied, "In your kingdom, please let my 2 sons sit in places of honor next to you, one on your right and the other on your left." When the 10 other disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant. But Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. But among you, it'll be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many." The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Well, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Well, on this Labor Day weekend, I have a question for you. Have any of you ever heard of the restaurant chain TGI Fridays? Okay. And we probably know what that stands for, right? TGIF. Thank God it's Friday. Now, why do you think that abbreviation, TGIF, is so popular? I mean, that they would actually name a restaurant. I mean, why do we thank God it's Friday? See, my guess is part of the reason is the fun we look forward to on the weekends. I mean, thank God it's Friday, right? But you see, I also think on this Labor Day weekend that it often has to do with how much we want to get away from our work. You see, we may not really enjoy our work. And so we count down the week until we can say, thank God it's Friday. Right? I know not for you guys, but for some people out there. And to see an example of this sentiment, I invite you to take a look at today's first lesson. The first thing we should notice is that the Apostle Paul is writing to people who weren't known for liking their jobs. And my guess is we can understand why. They were slaves. And so they didn't work each day because they wanted to, but because they had to. They had no choice. They had to work. And my guess is whether we work in the home, taking care of it, or we work somewhere outside the home for pay, that we may often have the same feeling as these slaves. That we don't necessarily work because we want to, but because we feel we have to. And so here Paul is talking to all of us who find themselves in that kind of situation. Every mom who has to pick up other people's dirty socks and underwear. Every person who has a boss over them, telling them what to do. Every person who works primarily because they have to pay the bills, pay the insurance. And so to me, Paul starts out saying how we may feel on work days, saying, slaves. So let me just stop and say, do you think that restaurant was wrongly named? I mean, do you think you would name it, Thank God It's Monday? Well, I don't know if I'm going to get you to that point today. But you see, in today's first lesson, God shows us how we can enjoy our work more, no matter what it is. You see, sometimes whether we enjoy our work or not, to me, depends on who we work for. And if you have a bad boss over you, as some of you maybe do or have had, just getting up each workday may be kind of an effort, right? We can actually come to dread it. But in verse 7, Paul says that there is a truth that can change that for you. In verse 7, Paul writes, work with enthusiasm, as though you were working for the Lord, rather than for people. Paul says that whenever we punch that time clock and start our workday, cha-ching, or we begin picking up that first smelly sock, that it's important that we know who it is that we're really working for. And he says if you think it's some person or corporation, it's not. That's not who we are mainly serving. Rather, we are serving our Savior, none other than Jesus Christ. That's who we're working for. That's our real boss. And so the first thing we should do each workday, no matter what we do, is to mentally make that swap. You see, this morning, and I know I'm a pastor, so you may say, well, yeah, it's part of the job, but it's not. I woke up this morning and I said, because I heard there was a good sermon on this subject. And I've been thinking about it. I woke up this morning and I said, today I get to go work for the Lord. And it made a huge difference. And in a minute I'll tell you why it makes that difference. But each workday, Paul says we need to make a point to understand that our real boss can be Jesus Christ. Well, what difference would that make? And to me, it makes a huge difference. First, with the Lord as our boss, every job we do, no matter what it is, can be elevated as being an important job. You see, with the Lord as our boss, we're to look at our jobs not as just something to get a paycheck, but as a form of ministry, as loving service. And we see this point in today's gospel lesson. If you take a look, what we see there is while Jesus' disciples want to have the power jobs, the high position jobs, Mom, can you ask Jesus if I can sit at his right and his left? Sure, sonny boy, I'll ask. But they want the high position jobs. They want the fame and fortune jobs. But while they want that, Jesus said that was not the key to greatness. That love was. That serving others is. And so much so that even Jesus chose that way of life, of loving service. Jesus says, for even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve. And that's why no job that we do is unimportant, no matter what it is. Because it's not so much our position that is important, or even what we do, but rather it is, is how we work that is important. Paul says that when we work in the loving way that he describes in the first lesson, if you take a look, and I'm just going to point out to you the words bit by bit, a few words that he uses. He uses these words to describe how we should go to work. He says obediently, with respect, trying to please the people we work for, with enthusiasm. He says when we go to work that way, then we are doing what is good in God's eyes. And that we are honoring God by doing it, no matter what our job. If we are lovingly serving. And that's why Martin Luther once said, even a milkmaid can milk to the glory of God. Because with the Lord as our boss, our loving service is a thing of honor in his eyes. No matter what position you have, no matter whether your task is big or small, as long as you lovingly serve. The second huge difference when God is our boss is we can be certain that our work is always being noticed and appreciated. You see, I've worked long enough to know that I think one of the things that discourages people about their work situations, whether they're working in the home or working outside the home, is that they feel that their work is not being appreciated. And so it can often become difficult to wake up and go to work knowing that no one really appreciates it. And I see this sentiment so clearly in the following true story that I want to share with you this morning. See if you've ever, this is what I want you to do, see if you've ever felt this way when it comes to your work. You see, years ago there was a missionary doctor who had spent 40 years of his life helping people in Africa. So not in LA, not in New York, in Africa. And after those 40 years of hard work, he decided to retire. And so he wired ahead that he would be returning by ship, and as you would expect, he gave the date and time of his arrival to the people on the other end. Well, as he was on board crossing the Atlantic, he kind of thought back over all the years he had spent serving the people of Africa. And finally, as the ship pulled into port, this old man's heart swelled with pride as he saw the homecoming that had been prepared for him. You see, a huge crowd had gathered. But you see, as this old man stepped off the boat onto the dock, he realized that the people hadn't gathered to pay tribute to him, but to someone else. In fact, no one had come to show their appreciation. For all of his hard work, all of his sacrifices, all of his good deeds, not one single person. And so he writes in his journal that, tilting his face heavenward, he spoke these words. He said, "Oh God, after giving all these years of my life to my fellow man, was it too much to ask that one person, just one person, be here to welcome me home?" And he writes in his journal that in the very next instant, in the quietness of his heart, he sensed the voice of God whisper to him, "You're not home yet." And that when you come home to me, you will be welcomed. You You see, in today's first lesson, the Apostle Paul wants us to understand that the same is true for each of us. Why can we work with enthusiasm each day? Even when no one's watching what we do and we might be stuck in some cubicle somewhere or sorting laundry in the basement, seemingly forgotten, surely underappreciated. See, Paul says we have every reason to approach our daily work with enthusiasm. And that's because none of our work is ever unnoticed. And none of our work is ever unappreciated. God sees it all. Every day when we wake up, God goes to work with us. Don't think you're commuting on your own. He's coming with you, and he's appreciating our loving service. And that truth should give us a great sense of joy. For our work is noticed, our work is appreciated, because God is our boss. And he knows it, and he appreciates it. Well, the last thing I'm going to bring up today as to why it's so important that we realize that we work for Jesus is found in verse 8, if you want to take a look. Paul writes, remember that the Lord will reward each one of us for the good we do, whether we are slaves or free. Paul says that we can take joy in the fact that God not only sees our work, oh, I see you're busy, notices, but that God rewards us for the good we do. That to God, loving service is something worth rewarding. And here Paul tells us that that is exactly what God will do. And there are many other passages that tell us that God will reward us for the good we do. In Matthew chapter 10, for example, Jesus says, and if you give even a cup of cold water to one of the least of my followers, you will surely be, I'll let you say it. Rewarded. You'll be rewarded. I won't just notice, I'll reward you. And so Paul says it's like this. Our next workday is going to be a great day. Whether we work at home or whether we work outside the home. Because we in the Milkmaid will have an opportunity to glorify God. In the everyday loving service that we do, even in our workplaces. See, we often think there's a distinction, and our culture wants us to see a distinction. When you go to work, it's not religious time. Religious time is this hour right here. When that's done, shut it off, folks. But God says that's never the case. Every loving service you do, even in your workplaces, is something that God notices, appreciates, and rewards. And so every single day you can go to work with enthusiasm because something important is going on. And so you see, the restaurant chain actually has it wrong, and you may want to talk to them about this. It should actually be renamed. Thank God it's Monday. Because you see, now at work, whatever you do, we are working for who? We're working for the Lord. And so this week, when you do what you do, make that swap in your mind. You're not working for people. You're working for God. And that changes everything. And what joy that is. So TGIM. And have a happy Labor Day. Amen.